Dr. Kasturirangan, Dr. Nagaraja, Dr. Krishna Swami, all the eminent scholars and scientists assembled here on this memorable occasion. Visit of Dr. Kasturirangan is a memorable event in the history of Prayoga. To describe him as the chairman of the ISRO, as the author of the new education policy, is to limit an otherwise indescribable personality in science. I remember there was a biography of another astrophysicist. I think it was Dr. Subramaniam Chandrasekhar in Chicago University. Somebody wrote a biography of his. I remember, I think the name of the author is Miller. He called him Emperor of the Stars. Emperor of the Stars. You have the Emperor of Space here. His recent book, Space and Beyond, brings the whole concept of space next door. And we'll be amazed at the range of things space science and concept of space has done to us already, and what's going to do to us in the years to come. It is a phenomenal introduction to the potential of space as such. And that book, Space and Beyond, it is a remarkable education of what the future is going to be. And it's not some kind of a remote thing that goes somewhere into the sky. The whole space is brought next door to us, and space as a concept has such impact on our day-to-day life that fishing, agriculture, health, everything will perhaps be controlled by space science. And this is and by describing him as the author of the education policy, or chairman of the ISRO, is to limit this multidimensional personality. We are grateful to him on behalf of Prayoga that he found time to be with us and share a few of his very precious thoughts with us about the future of education. Dr. Nagaraja has done us proud by this imaginative initiative, which as a personal challenge he has taken up and has come up with this concept. This is something which is heartwarming, and this is, in a non-trivial sense, an indication of how human minds will evolve under the stress and pressure of the needs of times. Indian society is getting into a spin. It has multiple dimensions and multiple forces operating on it. How to unite the Indian polity is only because of education, liberal education, that society can evolve. Ladies and gentlemen, in this intellectual conclave, we heard Dr. Kasturirangan explain the philosophy of the new education policy. Everything will change. And in the new age of science and technology, most unpredictable things are possible. And one of the things that we are already, I think Dr. Gandasamy is an expert to speak on it. People already predict an infinite expansion of human lifespan. They say the statement, exhortation of the inevitability of death and taxes, in that statement you remove the expression death, and death is not inevitable, and human lifespan can expand infinitely. An author by name Raymond Kurzweil, another doctor by name Dr. Terry Grossman, brought out a book. It has the same title of Isaac Asimov's old title, Fantastic Voyage. He says, lifespan, you can add 1 year to your lifespan every year. And he says, how? he tells me that he tells us that at the end of each chromosome, human chromosome, there is a tail end called the telomere. It gets shortened, and they have now an enzyme called telomerase, which will expand it. And they have administered to mice, and they have lived 3 times their normal age. And be careful that please keep your health properly, because you may have to expect a life expectancy of 150 years. And of course, Prayoga will provide all the answers for your problems. Ladies and gentlemen, the biography by, as I mentioned, the Emperor of the Stars. In that, Subramaniam Chandrasekhar, that eminent astrophysicist who stayed in New York, in Chicago University all the time, he speaks of the spirit of science. And he recalls the advice and the inspiration from Sir Arthur Eddington, who was his professor. He speaks of the Greek mythology, an instance from Greek mythology. There's a young boy who was in prison in custody of the authorities. His father builds for him wings made of feathers and wax and asks him to fly to liberty. Whether it is hubris or challenge of a young scientist's mind, he, instead of flying to liberty, he flies toward the sun. The sun melts his wax under his wing, and he falls into the sea and dies. Is it mere hubris or a spirit of science? And Dr. Chandrasekhar says, it's the spirit of science. Let us fly toward the sun. Let us see which sun will match the wax in our wings, and let us meet the challenge of that. That is the spirit of science that Dr. Miller's philosophy speaks about us. We are hearing about the dimensions of curiosity. Dimensions of human curiosity expanded the moment of his ecological dependence ended. His ecological liberation, his fright from lightning, his fear from animals, wild animals, all that was conquered. Then creativity stepped into his personality. And this kind of change, that civilizational change that occurred, that it is not curiosity. Curiosity has very interesting, otherwise interesting dimensions. It is wonderment. Vismayo, Vismaya, the kind of wonderment. Vismayo Gnanabhumika, the foundation for knowledge is wonderment. And this kind of wonderment has to be spurred in individuals, particularly in the children, a sense of wonderment at what you see, what happens. And in fact, in education reform, perhaps one of the departments of our civilization, particularly the judiciary, is far behind. In fact, cynically it is said, the law is one generation behind the needs of times. Judges are 2 generations behind the needs of times. The courts 3 generations behind the needs of times. And when I persuaded the Prime Minister to permit us to use. Nasim Rao was very generous in his response to my request to establish a National Judicial Academy. We have spent 100 crores on it. It is, when we had this National Judicial Academy, I wanted the first thing for the judges to be exposed to was the spirit of science. We invited, I remember, the secretary to the Department of Science was a scientist himself. If I remember the name right, it was Mr. P. Ramarao. He came to us and he brought a piece of iron, steel, and passed it on to everyone. They said, let's test its strength, and it was a very strong piece of steel. And he had some liquid in some container, in an enclosed container, he had some liquid. He dipped that piece of steel into that and took it out. And with the help of some, this thing, it broke like a piece of chalk. See, the properties of matter, depend on the cryo conditions or hot conditions. That's the eye-opener for, see, our all gentlemen are amazed at the instant transformation of a piece of steel into a piece of chalk. And you see, material science will bring out greater wonders in the years to come. The whole next span of 10 years from now will be the most exciting bend of human history and human venture in the field of knowledge and science and technology. Everything will change. The only thing is we must have the spirit to understand and accommodate ourselves to the spirit of change. And this institution, in a sense, symbolizes that spirit. Dr. Nagaraja's contribution is not a building, beautiful building or a laboratory. It is a response to the challenges of the future. And that we must understand, and the dimensions of the response must be so imaginative and open. Things will change. In fact, I had a stint of 2 terms as the Chancellor of the Central University of Hyderabad. One of my vice chancellors was the space scientist. He was working in the ISRO. I wanted particularly a center, not a brick and mortar center, a cyber center for the history of ideas of science and philosophy. The Vice Chancellor and I, we sat together and gave 67 ideas, concept of time, consciousness, mind, from Archimedes to modern hydrodynamics, who contributed what and what became its industrial application during what time, and have that at a click of the mouse. The researcher must be able to find out how these ideas got refreshment from stage to stage with the spur of their potential for industrial application. This is the kind of, but the then Minister for the relevant department was my own good young friend, Kapil Sibal, who was the minister. He said, he came to Bangalore and told me, whatever fund you want, I will give you. But nobody picked it up. Nobody wanted to get into this kind of chronicling of the history of ideas of science and philosophy. What is the concept of time? In the ancient philosophy, there are 4 views of time. And time and mind, consciousness, these are all some of the things which are the most challenging challenges to human imagination. And these are things which are going to change the whole human race. Future of humankind will depend upon the kind of use or misuse that we are going to make of science. And you can imagine just 4 ounces of a liquid, some bottle in composition. Dr. Kinsami will tell us what it is. Dispersed in air and water can kill thousands of people at one go. This is the mischievous potential of science. But you must set it off against the positive sides of science. And you have got the most beautiful statement of the scientist's faith, the optimistic faith of scientists. And that was by that famous mentor of Ramanujan, G.S. Hardy. He wrote a Mathematical Apology, in which he says, what is the justification, what is the answer to the challenges of time? So Kota Harinarayan was my vice chancellor. And there was in another term, there was a microbiologist, was Hasnain. Mr. Hasnain was my vice chancellor. We had a very exciting time with them in the university planning for certain things. But the politics of students, politics of this thing, they're very difficult to deal with. You can't assume anything today in the circumstance, the torn social fabric. You can't assume anything. But such centers like this are the backbone of optimism for a society. You have to put your faith in science and put total faith in science, and it will solve all your problems. Today it's a memorable day for Prayoga. As Miller called Subramaniam Chandrasekhar the Emperor of the Stars, I call Dr. Kasturirangan the Emperor of Space. His beautiful book, Space and Beyond, which I read recently, gives you an idea of the immense potential And you have to have science, in every science curriculum you must include space science. And every legal education you must have at least a modicum of dose of space law. These are all things which as we grow up, we must think of the curriculum change, curriculum modification, and curriculum improvement. It must be done every year. You can't wait for 10 years for the thing to change. In fact, I chaired a committee of 40 eminent medical scientists sometime in the late 90s to draft ethical guidelines for biogenetic research. In forwarding the report to government, I said, by the time I come to the end of my letter, I suspect my report will be obsolete. That's the pace of change. And poor 18 years thereafter, somebody telephoned to me from the office that we want to revise it. I said, have you read my letter to government? He said, I have not. Please read it. Afterwards, he didn't come back to me. So this is the kind of change that's going to happen. Change is the constant. And the dimensions of change depend on certain great minds like Dr. Kasturirangan, who can give direction to the future and how we may hope to live in a better society. Thank you very much for your patience. I'm so happy to be with you. And let me tell you something. The most people think that I have long discussions with my son about it. There is this STEM philosophy that the future belongs to science, technology, mathematics, and engineering. That's the only hope for the youngsters in the future. But liberal arts expand your mind. And what you observe later on is science. But expansion of mind is wonderment. And that wonderment can be contributed to in a big measure by liberal arts, by poetry, drama, and those things that add savor to life itself. And this is as important to open up your imagination. This is the kind of thing that we should do, and Prayoga is doing it. And see this in some corner of the universe, some insignificant village, somewhere in a backward country like India. This kind of thing is being debated. A center being put up to put human mind to its limit and potential. And this is the most important contribution as a symbol that Prayoga has provided. Thank you very much for your patience and courtesy.